Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Between the Lines Live. My name is Vanessa Rader. I'm the Head of Research here at Ray White, and today I'm joined by a panel to talk about all things South East Queensland, particularly on the development site market. So I'm joined here by Mark Creevy, who's the Director of Ray White Special Projects here in Queensland, and Ash Forbes, Regional Director at Ray White Valuations. So welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that anything residential, the development site market is obviously super topical, residential just as topical around the country at the moment. Within this period where we've got this kind of mismatch between the demand and supply, population continues to grow, particularly up here in South East Queensland, and we just don't have enough housing to really cater for that demand. So what we're seeing is a combination of effects. Interest rates have gone up, making it more difficult as well. The cost of construction, the cost of land, labour, there's really a lot of issues in the way of getting that new supply out of the ground. So that's what we'll kind of talk about today, and I probably want to talk about kind of a few different sectors. So we might start with the land market. I know that you, Mark, in particular, do a lot of work in that kind of englobo land subdivision space. Maybe also kind of the townhouse infill market and where townhouses are going, and also that high density sort of residential apartment, which in the Gold Coast in particular, Ash. So let's start with you, Mark. Let's start off with land. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about what Ray White Special Projects does here up in Queensland?
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, so Ray White Special Projects is a franchise of the Ray White Commercial Group. We've been in business now for about 30 years, and we specialise in the marketing and sale of residential development sites. So they're generally sites that will have some type of residential product as an end use. So it could be houses, townhouses, apartments, retirement, aged care, mixed use, land lease communities. It's generally some type of residential. Certainly the part of the market that we're seeing the most activity in at the moment is certainly the land market. Mm-hmm. The supply and demand equation is very heavily skewed to undersupply. We saw, obviously as a result of COVID and home builder, a massive spike in demand for house and land off the back of home builder with that stimulus, and the market's really been trying to catch up on the supply side ever since, and not doing very well at it at the moment.
No, land is particularly scarce, isn't it, around the whole region. So in terms of that kind of residential land subdivision market, where is there land? Where is the activity happening at the moment, or is there any activity?
Oh, look, there's always activity. The major growth corridors, which are obviously on the outskirts of the urban footprint, there's new estates in all of those areas. We are seeing sort of demand for land ranging from small sites, which could be 10 lots, 20 lots, right through to 2,000 lots, although that's very, very hard to get. So the interest at the moment is from small, mid-size, large developers. Yeah, so there's activity across all scales of the market,
yes,
depending on what your capability is in terms of. But we're seeing demand is really constrained by the availability of opportunities in that space. So what is in the market at the moment is getting very strong competition at all levels, all locations, and all scale.
So so that's a good news story, I suppose, because we need to see some of that land advance into kind of an end product. But where's that inquiry coming from? Is it domestic? Is it local? Either local developers, or are they people coming from all other parts of the country?
There's obviously a strong pool of local developers. We're getting a lot of interest, and we have had for the last few years from interstate groups as well. Mm-hmm. We've had a number of transactions that we've done over the last handful of years for large sites, which has really been probably dominated by interstate groups. Mm-hmm. Local groups are equally as active. We've had some recent sites which have been probably smaller scale sites. We've had smaller groups from Sydney, which are groups that we haven't dealt with previously, that have just responded to marketing campaigns. So I think there's challenges in the southern markets. A lot of the groups from Sydney and particularly Melbourne see opportunity in the southeast Queensland market. We are constrained for opportunity. So certainly, whilst there's lots of people locally and interstate looking, that just creates more competition for the opportunities that are available at the moment.
Yeah, I suppose those buyers from those southern states are looking to Queensland as a whole as a location where the interstate migration has been particularly robust. It always has been, but it's been particularly strong over the last few years, and that's really expected to continue that in addition to the overseas migration, which is going to increase that need for housing ever more. So it's certainly an interesting time in that side of the market. But on the Gold Coast, I suppose, Ash, there's probably even less opportunity when we're looking at that kind of land subdivision space. Probably northern New South Wales, a bit of activity there or opportunity there, and northern parts of the Gold Coast?
So the Gold Coast, I'm hearing, is being compared to Noosa or Byron Bay. It's just landlocked, land constrained. The bulk of the land is controlled by Leader in the northern Gold Coast or Tweed with Kings Forest and Cobblecode Lakes. The only estate of note which has been under construction and been marked at the moment is called Sky Ridge at Wurundjeri, probably a 10-year life cycle. Once he's done, there's really nothing else other than the Leader holdings at Coomera and into New South Wales. So you've got incredible demand, prices are being ratcheted up every release, and buyers have got nowhere else to go. So either they pay the price or they don't get a new lot.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend we're seeing around the entire market. But so when you were talking about these kind of land subdivisions, I understand you mentioned kind of the size and everything. Those size of those lots have gotten so much smaller over a 10-year period, over the 30 years you've been working in this space. So who are obviously the end user is kind of mum and dad investors, is mum and dad own occupiers, is that who the kind of like the end user for these kind of products, the land?
Yeah, so depending on the price point, there's owner occupiers at the entry level point to the market. Obviously as you get closer into the city through BCC, they're probably more owner occupiers than investors.
Mm-hmm.
There is a pretty strong pool of investors looking for house and land. We talked to quite a few developers at the moment who've indicated that they're kind of holding back on the stock that they make available to investment markets. If they wanted to increase their volumes of sales, they could easily do that by opening it up to investment channels, because there's a lot of demand for that, but they're deliberately holding that back. So they're sort of working on maximising their margins and obviously just limiting the amount of stock that they do deliver through investment channels.
What we haven't spoken about is the whole construction costs. So the cost of construction, so for users, for those mum and dads or those investors that they're wanting to actually build the house product, how easy or difficult is that to do in them at the moment? Because we've seen an awful lot of kind of building groups go into administration. The cost of construction has really just increased during that COVID period and through until continue now. The pressure on labour, particularly up here in Queensland with the Olympics and all the infrastructure projects, is making it really tough. So what does that mean for, firstly, the developer, but also that kind of end user as well, or the end buyer?
Yeah, certainly with the pressures on construction, which is sort of more prevalent in the high density market. In the home building market, there's definitely been stress, and it's been well publicised that there's lots of builders that have unfortunately gone into administration or, not able to exist. There's still, an abundance of builders that are capable of operating in that space. Although I think you probably look at lead times, for building today are substantially longer than what they were probably pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have the supply chain and labour issues. Although, you can get a house built, obviously just takes longer and costs more than it used to.
Mm-hmm.
As you work up into the high density markets, then the number of builders that are active in those spaces diminishes pretty significantly.
Okay, and in terms of the banking sector and the financing of these projects, I know that there's only a handful on the Gold Coast you mentioned, but for these people coming from the developers coming from interstate, how easy or difficult is it, or the appetite from the banks to kind of lend on these kind of residential subdivision properties? Is there an appetite, or is there caution, or? So
on the Gold Coast, our main subdivision is Sky Ridge. They're all funded by cash. Parent group out of WA, there's no debt involved. Leader, controlled by Bob L, again, Northern Coomera and Tweed Heads, again, it's all cash. He doesn't need debt. So it's fascinating that these guys act outside of the banking sphere. Their buyers, by and large, are also cashed up.
Mm-hmm.
We're not hearing contracts fall over at all when they come to settlement for the house and land packages. Often on the Gold Coast, they've been pre-sold a year or two before they come for settlement on some of these lots. The problem we've got on the Gold Coast is, even though you've only got one estate being marketed, there have only been drip feeding certain tranches to the market to control supply. So the affordability issue is, on one hand, profitability for the developer is the driving force.
Yes.
So they could release many lots potentially en masse, reduce some of the under supply issues, but they're not going to do that.
Okay. Yeah, it makes things tough, doesn't
So,
it? How
yeah.
about in terms of with the clients that you're dealing with when it comes to financing? There's been a lot more kind of non-bank lenders, I suppose, coming into the fray when it comes to developers. Are you seeing a little bit of that, Mark, and both of you?
Yeah, we see finance is not the biggest issue in the market, certainly.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of liquidity in the market, you know, so non-bank lenders are probably more dominant than traditional bank lenders today, and that would be quite different to what we've seen over many years. There's lots of private wealth, private equity, you know, family wealth, intergenerational wealth, and a lot of those groups that are happy to supply large amounts of equity to support developers in their endeavours. And quite a number of the deals that we've done in SEQ on pretty major transactions are, you know, backed by significant private equity coming out of, you know, just family wealth from interstate or even overseas. So we find that the finance part of the equation is certainly not the
Stumbling block.
Not the stumbling block.
No, it's just the availability and the availability of land. And what about kind of planning restrictions stuff? Obviously, the land has to be opened up in order to be developed. I suppose planning, we could probably move on to kind of townhouses is probably the next kind of thing to talk about, because the townhouse market is one which, you know, affordability you mentioned is difficult for a lot of people, and maybe that townhouse is that kind of in-between property that's going to be suitable for families. Also, often they're, you know, in infill areas as well as, you know, completely new parts of the market, close to transport, kind of small footprint, so you some sort of affordability there. How are you seeing that part of the market? Is there a bit more activity happening for townhouses or not, or is that even more difficult to stack up? Because then it's that kind of built form as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of demand for townhouse sites at the moment, and groups are really trying to deliver product at a lower price point than what you can with traditional house and land. And that's to cater to people that may not be able to afford, you know, house and land in some of those key emerging areas. Again, there's a real shortage of supply and opportunity in that space. And we saw in 2019, you know, Brisbane City Council brought in their planning scheme amendment H, which actually further limited the ability to deliver townhouses on low density land within Brisbane City Council.
Yeah.
And all that's served to do is actually make it more difficult. So in the outskirts of Brisbane, you know, the housing typology is just house and land at $1 million.
Yes.
It's not feasible to do any sort of built form because the feasibility doesn't work to do a vertical apartment product.
Yes.
And in many cases, you can't do townhouses. So it's actually really, really difficult, and it does make, you know, affordability a real issue in some of these areas.
Yeah.
If you could do townhouses, provides a really nice point of difference in a lower entry point.
Yes.
Rather than having to move a lot further out.
So the planning, so it comes back to kind of making some changes in that kind of planning space. And talking about planning, Southport, they've got their PDA on that part of the market, that Southport CBD area. So they've got in their plan a mixture of both that kind of high rise and those, I think it's called garden cities.
Yep.
So that would allow for some more townhouse development, do you think?
The thing is that PDA has backfired. The market has met, the planning scheme's met reality. The bulk of the Southport PDA is zoned for higher density res. There's been almost no towers built since it came out in 2012, I think it was. You can't make high rises stack up in non-prime locations on the Gold Coast at the moment. Southport is full of non-prime sites. So the planning scheme is conducive to high rise development. Developers just walk away.
Yeah, okay.
So townhouses might work there, yes.
There's no...
Very few, it hasn't been sought after to date.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I really think that townhouse part of the market is, you know, somewhat the missing piece for a lot of people, because it does provide that little bit of affordability, because you're either going from the house to the house and land through to the townhouses. Otherwise, we're talking about kind of the unit development market. And we might start with you here on Ash, if we can move on to units. And you mentioned the prestige markets of the Gold Coast, and you're probably some of the country's most expensive real estate when it comes to some of these high-rise waterfront apartment buildings. Tell me what's going on the Gold Coast in terms of development.
What we're seeing is a lot of contracts being cancelled by developers at a scale which I have never seen before. We're seeing entire buildings or projects being cancelled, like contracts being cancelled and then given to the agent to sell a second time at a higher price in order to make the feasibility more viable.
So sorry, this is off the plan.
Off the plan, sorry. So there's 2 or 3 examples where you've had projects in the marketplace for up to 2 years. significant pre-sales, like circa $400-500 million worth of pre-sales.
What sort of uplift are we seeing in terms of what the
Yeah,
contract price
so they've
was
gone
versus
back.
what they're
So they've
reselling?
gone back and said,
Yeah.
if you want to buy back in, on average 10-15% on average.
Okay.
If you don't buy back in and we take it back off you, maybe 20%, 25% is realist price. By and large, to date, they've had a lot of success with buyers re-engaging at the new price points. And the original price points, it has to be said, were also at new benchmarks. They weren't cheap, they were up there.
Yes.
And some of these projects have even been into construction. They've had to go back, cancel them all, and go back for a second tilt with the hope that everybody will be re-engaged to shop the feasibility. So you're seeing projects being sold twice, ostensibly, before they're even out of the ground in construction, which is our laws in Queensland allow that to happen with other planning contracts at the moment.
And so this is purely due to the uplift in the cost of construction. So in order to make that project now stack up, they really need to kind of go back out and get that kind of higher realisation.
So there's sometimes I've been involved with a project 3 times. I've done a valuation on it, and they're only just back at a basement level, and they've had to go back for 3 price rises to purchasers or new purchasers in order to make the costs or offset the costs.
Yes.
It's unusual times.
It is unusual. And so who are the main sort of purchasers for this? I'm assuming that's not...
It's all, so it's all cashed up buyers, high net worths, there's no debt involved, local downsizes, Sydney, Melbourne, lock and leave, holiday apartments. So on the Gold Coast, we're seeing basically anything non-prime, which almost is 1 street back from the beach or more, almost is non-prime at the moment, is very, very hard to stack up on a feasibility. So inevitably, even though our town plan in the central areas is all zoned for high-rise, what we're hearing is that if you've got an old unit or an old townhouse or old house in some of these precincts, it's more viable at the moment to put your unit to the open market for sale than to try to join with adjoining owners and present to a developer, because you can't make it stack. So even though the sites are zoned for high-rise, often with unlimited height limits and unlimited densities, at the moment, you can't make them work. The highest and best use are single units or single houses, which is quite remarkable.
Brisbane's quite similar, because most of the more successful projects of late have been smaller boutique projects along the river, which are catering to downsizers that are cash buyers. They're bigger projects. They command more on a rate per metre because of the premium being next to the river or the city. The real challenge in the market is being able to deliver volume product. So in 2015-16, which was the last really big run in the unit market, it was all small product.
Yes.
So 1s and 2s.
Really investor sort of product.
300 units in a building or 1 and 2 bedroom product. So now people are going back to those old DAs and completely recutting them to try to do bigger product, and where they can, because they can, the rate per metre is a lot stronger. The viability of doing projects with small product is really difficult at the moment, because they can't quite get enough on a rate per metre to justify selling that small product. They're losing money on the small product, and offsetting it on the larger product. And
so those people that are buying those larger products, you mentioned the downsizers, but is that also kind of that family market, or is that price point still too high?
So it's retirees, downsizers, interstate investors, overseas investors, and quite often they're not subject to finance, they're just cash buyers.
So what happens to the young couple or that need to find a first property?
Well,
what's the option for them?
Well, they're renting, or at the moment the second-hand unit market in Brisbane has been booming.
Yeah.
Because,
the values have increased.
Yeah, they've gone up a lot because there's a lack of new product.
Yes.
So they're saying, well, we'll go and buy second-hand product, so it's cheaper, it's more affordable, it gives them an entry into the market.
Yes.
We're seeing, so some of the feedback through the Ray White group, through the Resi offices, is there's large amounts of investment stock in the unit market that when it comes onto the market doesn't end up back in the rental pool. Yeah. It's been picked up by owner-occupiers.
Well, that's a really good news story though, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it's good for those people, but it places more pressure on the rental market.
Well, yes.
Because there's less
But
stock.
they've come out of the rental market, so it's like,
so
there's
no
net
there's
change.
winners and losers,
Yes.
but if you're a renter, it just means there's less rental product.
Well,
so
if you look at the rent prices, in like the rents for units in Brisbane are particularly, they're only, I think it's Sydney, Perth, because the Perth price has gone up, and Brisbane being the top kind of markets in terms of rents. Like they're very expensive now. So you can understand if you have the ability to get a loan and buy one of those second-hand units, that's probably a more attractive option than...
Yeah, but for people looking at buying units, so people that are getting unit stock on the market are finding that they're selling it because there's not much competition for buyers that are looking in that space. And I think when you look at Brisbane's median values for new and second-hand units, it's still well below Sydney and Melbourne. So there's good opportunity for price growth and certainly strong rental return for people that are looking in that space.
Definitely. And you mentioned, Mark, as well, about, the number of builders and developers out there, or builders really more so, that can do these kind of large-scale residential developments in terms of high-rise apartments, that kind of the pool diminishes as the projects get bigger. So who, I don't want to name names of who's who, but who is kind of best placed to try to capture some of that market or do work in that market? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of groups that would even look at tendering on a large-scale apartment project at the moment. The groups that have an advantage at the moment are the owner builders. So in the townhouse space, there's a suite of guys that are active in developing and building. And in the vertical space, the apartment markets are groups like Mosaic and GVG, just to name a couple, who manage their own construction, can really take advantage in the current marketplace in terms of being able to manage that construction piece as opposed to going out and tendering through third-party builders.
And Ash, this whole issue of properties selling 3 times over, I'm sure a lot of people watching maybe didn't know that some of that was kind of going on. Will these projects, do you feel confident that a lot of these projects are actually going to start moving a little bit more quicker and we'll start seeing a few more completions? Because these projects now, they've been strung out now for a long period of time if they've been sold 3 times over.
So to link back to the finance question, so the banks, the lenders are chasing a tier 1 builder in order to bank a deal. Pre-sales are much less important at the moment than nailing a builder to the floor. You can't get a tier 1 builder within reason. They're all closed. So the owner builder model, which Mark was mentioning, is now very much in vogue for both the banks and the non-banks. The problem is there's only so much labour to go around, so it's unlikely to see any more significant supply added to the Gold Coast apartment pipeline, and that is why we are seeing such strong growth, anecdotal and confirmed, on the pre-sale price list, on pre-sales, been rescinded and back again. The buyers know, if I want to buy in with a high-quality builder, with a tier 1 builder, high-quality developer, if I say no to this one, I might be waiting 3 or 4 years. There's everyone's busy with infrastructure works. So that's what's driving this frenetic pace to secure an off-the-plan apartment at prices which lie above anything else we've ever seen on the Gold Coast.
But you can see from the point of view of that person that's entered into the contract, if you're saying it's a 10 or 15% uplift today, otherwise it goes back into the market, it's 25%, well, they're going to miss out on everything if they don't.
So that's why
they put their hand in their pocket and pay that little bit extra.
So the engagement has been very high by and large because I think people understand that. So they don't want to have to dip back into that 15%, but they realise if I don't, all bets are off.
I'm missing out on that capital gain that I would have got that might be 25%.
It's an interesting dynamic to see.
It's a super interesting dynamic.
And it's fluid. So you're seeing unconditional contracts, maybe say 12 weeks old, on a like-for-like basis are now old in terms of the contracts issued or contracts conditional on a project, materially higher on a like-for-like basis. And so it's very hard to find west true north. It's moving that quickly, again, in response to shoring up feasibilities.
I think that we've already nearly finished time with, but let's kind of end up on, I always like to kind of ask, well, where are the opportunities in this market? And that might be a little bit more difficult to kind of, well, no, not really, but to nut out. So I might start with you, Mark. Where do you see, I don't want to say if you had all this money, what would you do? But where do you see the opportunity, or, resi prices continue of the end stock is going up very, very rapidly.
Yeah, look, the opportunity, I mean, people look at the SEQ market broadly and have interest because there's a confidence in the long-term outlook and confidence that there will be long-term value growth and continued demand. So whilst it's difficult to get into the market because there's not a lot of opportunities on the ground, looking hard enough and trying hard enough and working your way and getting something, there's certainly a lot of, once you can get that, the opportunity is enormous. Because, whilst, yes, the federal government is sort of pulling the reins in on immigration, interstate numbers, which is probably has a much bigger influence on the Queensland population story than the sort of the overseas story, because inevitably they come into the southern states and then move up. that interstate story is stronger than it's ever been.
Yes.
And the outlook for that is that it's not going to diminish.
Mm.
So off the back of continued sort of a low supply, because there's not much on the horizon that's going to sort of looks like a circuit breaker to sort of bring a flood of any type of stock to the
Yeah, for
market,
sure.
means that, the demand for the product's going to be sustained, and with that supply and demand equation, there's still likely to be not a major spike, but strong sort of uplift in terms of values.
Mm.
So that's why everybody's looking here, and I guess that's where they see the opportunity.
Do you think that we'll investigate kind of other markets? I suppose it's always around those metropolitan areas, isn't it? Like no matter where you are in the country, it doesn't make sense or it doesn't stack up because we don't have big vibrant cities in regional areas so much.
No, so look, people come here for lifestyle and fundamentally, employment. So the coastal markets have always been high demand. So Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, east of the highway,
yes,
generally been always in demand. The affordable markets, which are more Logan and Ipswich, will cater for the people that obviously don't have the budget,
yes,
to sort of move into those more aspirational areas. Those areas have put a lot of focus into access in terms of making sure they've got good road and rail access, and obviously employment drivers to make sure that the people, if that's where they can afford to live, they want to keep them there as well in terms of where they're working and obviously spending their money. So each of the LGAs have obviously got different focuses on on sort of where they place the focus to attract new people.
Mm. How about you, Ash? Where would you see the?
I'd mirror most of what Mark was saying. On the Gold Coast, there's just so few opportunities. Maybe if you can afford to buy a beachfront site, dive in. You're going to do well.
You can just afford to.
I think if
buy a beachfront site.
I think if you're in the market on the Gold Coast in residential in any form, you stand to do well. As developers keep doing the heavy lifting with prices going up and up and up, everybody just benefits from that.
And the Gold Coast in terms of a city, it's been growing ridiculously, hasn't it? The local economy is doing really well.
And post-COVID, it's materially changed. You can now legitimately have a high-paying job based in Sydney, but live on the Gold Coast.
Yes.
We never had that.
Yep.
The GFC, we didn't have that. The GFC wiped the Gold Coast off the map because most of our beachfront product was holiday homes.
Yes.
The first asset to get sold when you lose your job or your bonuses for your holiday house.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
There's so many people, like being a Sydney person, there's so many people I know that actually do that, and they do commute and maybe come up to work for 2 or 3 days, and then they head back up. I said that the wrong way around, up to Gold Coast, but that's certainly something that's been
Yes,
happening.
the Gold Coast is no longer an up and down cycle.
And also if you look at just the vibrancy of your city, like it's not just a holiday destination either.
Mm.
Like if you look at the office markets, and I'm a commercial person, so I'll just pop this in, but it's probably the lowest vacancy office market in the country, and it has been for quite some time now. So that just shows the business growth and what's been going on, employment.
Yeah, the economic drive is far more diverse than just property and tourism, which it has been for decades.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Anyway, well, I think that probably takes us to an end of our discussion here today. So I hope everybody enjoyed that kind of chat about what's happening here in southeast Queensland in terms of the residential development market. And so thanks so much to Mark and Ash. Please reach out to the guys if you've got any questions or you have some spare money to buy a waterfront site in the Gold Coast, or anything that you have going. So thanks so much, and as always, you can always jump back on YouTube and or share this with your friends. It's there forever, our comments. So also we're putting this up on Spotify as well, probably by the end of the day or tomorrow. So go back and listen to all of our webinars in the past and see how we go, how right or wrong we went with them. They're always kind of fun to listen back to. But thanks so much. We haven't got our dates for next month yet, but it looks pretty exciting that we'll have a really great speaker talking about something a little bit different. So stay tuned for the information on that. But otherwise, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Vanessa. Thank you.